Okay, part of my teaching and research at Royal Holloway is on contemporary African cinema. And in 2019 I published a book called Ethics and Aesthetics in Contemporary African Cinema, The Politics of Beauty. And this was a book engaging with cinema really of the last 20 years, so millennial cinema as I call it, and really sub-Saharan cinema, principally Francophone, but also Portuguese-speaking, Lusophone and Anglophone. So very much West African and Central African cinema of the last 20 years. And I tried to explore ways in which beauty, which for so often was denied or ignored or marginalized in African cinema, especially in the early period when it was very politically engaged post-colonial cinema in the new era of the post-colony, as it's called, so the 1960s, when there was a message to be found and it had to be a political message about change, about modernization. Now films are able, with much more sort of ease, to engage with questions of beauty and explore different kinds of beauty. So the book goes through different thematic areas, including violence, including language, including this new megacity in Africa, the Afropolis, so-called, dealing with masculinity and also migration. So these are some of the big themes that are being explored in contemporary African cinema. And this has been quite interesting for me in my teaching too. I teach on a final year course at Royal Holloway called Transnationalism, Diaspora and Globalization in Contemporary Film. And part of that course is dealing with African cinema and its evolution from the early days of post-independence, well, post-colonial independent cinema to this new cinema that is dealing more openly with themes that touch on beauty, what it is for a film to be beautiful, for example, to enjoy seeing a film. So the questions of entertainment come in here. And the course that I teach on the transnational cinema deals with films then of the early period, so the landmark films like Hala from 1974, which is dealing with corruption in a state that is pretty much Senegal in West Africa, by a great filmmaker, Ousmane Sembène, and comparing that then with a more recent film from 2006, called Bamako, the capital of Mali. And this is the film that is showing a trial of the World Bank, a trial of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, here in this very small working class courtyard in Bamako. And there's a sense in which there's a clear message, which is that yes, the World Bank controls Africa with its loans, and that causes problems for the people of a state like Mali. Globalization has its effects on climate change, desertification of the area, and people being basically laid off. This is all to do with the more kind of geopolitical forces at work in the world and its effects therefore on this particular region. But what's so interesting about this film then is not so much the obvious messages, this trial, which we also find in the early cinema, film with a message, but also aesthetically then, how the film is presented to us, how it's playing with expectations about narrative, how it's giving us a sense of the beauty of the cloth that is being created in front of us in this courtyard. They're making local cloth, a cloth which is at risk of being terminated effectively by the IMF, the World Bank, who control international capital. So what we're seeing are all these lines of, I think we can call them beauty really, different multicolored cloth, fabric being made, as well as a sense of what film can do. Different types of film within a film, different types of shot making, different characters with their own stories, and we're not always clear what these stories are. So there's a sense of always of mystery in this film. And this is one of the things that we talk about in the class on transnational cinema, and in particular questions of migration. There's a segment in the film which is about migration, an attempted migration by a young boy who can't find a job in Mali. And we go through a flashback in the film, and we see him reliving the trauma of this failed migration. And what we do in this course then, and I think that's why it's very contemporary and very relevant to students who are taking it, is we're talking about this crisis of migration to Europe, to Fortress Europe right now, often not successful. And what we're seeing in some of these films that are being made now, like Bamako, is sort of the background to these stories. Why it is that young men, and principally men, but not exclusively, are getting into boats or going across the desert, the Saharan desert, to try and get to Europe, what it means to them, what are the stakes of this trip. And this film then gives us a sense of the scale of the problem. So it's one of a number of films that we look at that are made by African filmmakers, but also European filmmakers who are dealing from the other side, looking at how European cinema is presenting the migrant who is trying to reach European shores. So it's a course that is extremely relevant now, and it's still a crisis that is happening now, as we know. And it's a course that students are able to follow up and do a dissertation on, if they want, on the question of the transnational.